And we see it all throughout the books of the Bible. When they start getting wrapped up, there's little messages that are delivered to certain groups of people. You see Paul do it a lot. You know, he starts mentioning people by name, and maybe a group or a church here, he has a little something to say about, you know, just to kind of keep people engaged and let them know that he's thinking of them and praying for them. Solomon, we don't know exactly when this book was written, but many of us believe that it was later in life. And he has a message to a certain group of people that he reverts to in our study for today. Because, you know, from day one in this book, he's been saying what? Life on earth or life under the sun is what? Vanity, right? And he spends a lot of time developing this thesis that says life without God is worthless. That's my terminology, not Solomon's. He's a lot more eloquent than me. But life on this earth without God is worthless. Why is it worthless? Because he goes in to talk about cycles and how the world just goes in a big cycle. Nothing is new, he says. Pain and suffering and floods and storms and heartbreak and hurt feelings, and it just goes in a big cycle. And if we don't have God at the center of our life, we're going to be miserable our whole time on earth. And then when it comes that judgment day, right, God is going to judge the wicked and the righteous. Then guess what? We're going to set ourselves up for eternal disappointment, an eternal hurt, an eternal struggling if we don't have God in the middle of our life. And so that's what he spent this whole book talking about. But here at the end, he turns his attention to young people, what he calls the youth. And he makes some specific pleas to the youth of who's going to be reading this, and to us older folks that are reading it, for a message to give to the youth. And what do you think he's going to say? What would be the message that Solomon would want to tell young people after delivering the thesis that he has? Any ideas? What would he want to tell them? It doesn't matter how old you are, young, medium, or up here, you've got to strive to have God at the center of your life. And as I read this through the eyes of a parent, and maybe when you read it through eyes of a parent or a grandparent, you're going to see some really interesting similarities here. He's making a plea for the youth to say, hey, time is fleeting here. Make good decisions. The decisions that you make will guide you for the rest of your life. Don't waste time making bad decisions and deviating from the course, because it's only going to cause pain and sorrow. That's really what he's saying here. And from a parent's eyes, Kimberly and I were talking about this, we're like, man, that's all parents do, right? We have a joke at our house, and it's probably not real funny to anybody else, but we say, we have 2 boys. I think it's impossible for them to make good decisions. You know? And we just sit here and we scratch our heads, and we're like, there must be some kind of blockage between this mind and the mouth and the actions that keeps good decisions from coming out. And if we think about parents and grandparents as we message to the youth growing up, don't we spend just about all of our time praying and talking to our kids about making good decisions? But the immaturity of a youthful mind works against that. And so Solomon stops and he puts a peg in the ground and he's like, hey, I want to talk to you youth people about the dangers of not making good decisions, why you should make good decisions, and then he comes back and he says, and I want you to think about what happens when you get older. I'll get to you in just a second. What happens when you get older? And he starts laying the groundwork that says, you're not always going to be 14. You're not always going to be 9. You're not always going to be 20. One of these days, you're going to be 70. And I want you to think about what this looks like. So prepare yourself for this. It's really interesting. We'll get into it in just a second. Yes, sir.
Isn't basically what he's following is what every set of parents do. First word in chapter 12 is remember. Remember the things of my life that were faithful and follow them. Remember my mistakes and don't do them.
We tell our kids that all the time, don't we? I can tell you what this path is going to look like because I've done it and I know. But they don't listen. But all we can do is continue to tell them, right? Yes, sir.
We were talking about this one time. Some friends, their children were still at home. Ours had already left home. And they made the comment, well, you don't worry about your kids anymore because they're grown.
Spoken of somebody that has small kids.
And I said, are you kidding? I worry about them more now. And they said, well, why? And I said, well, when they were at home, it may have been an illusion, but I feel like I had more control over them than I do now. I mean, they're grown and they're making their own decisions, and you just have to sit and sometimes watch and let them make mistakes.
Oh, I know. Oh.
And this also goes into church.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, every family has this, unfortunately, just about. But, we've got 3 kids. 2 of them are faithful members of church. 1 of them has left the church. And we've had talks about this. And it's something that keeps you awake at night, or else you'll go to sleep and you'll wake up in the middle of the night thinking about it. And you fret and fret and fret and think about, did I do everything that needed to be done? And you finally arrive at that point, and it took Gail and I years to reach this point to where we feel like we have done everything, and he's made his own choice. And I mean, he's a grown man in his 40s now, and so there's not. I just pray for him that he'll come to his senses one of these days.
Right.
And that's all I can do.
That's exactly right. Yes, ma'am?
It's just like any addiction that anyone deals with, alcoholism or anything, chocolate, whatever. If the person themselves does not reach the point that they realize they need something different or to stop what they're doing, your prayers are for you, but they have to open their heart to God and understand that God has to reach them. Mm-hmm. Because and it's at any time that they're growing up, when they decide they're smarter than you, which is most of their life, sometimes when they hit 21, you become smart. But that individual, and some of us were in our 40s, you don't know what you're missing and you don't know what you need, but you know the life you're living is okay for you. Well, it's not.
Right.
And you have to open your eyes.
Sure. That's one of the best things about prayer is we talk a lot about prayer. We preach a lot about prayer. We pray about prayer all the time. But you know that we really don't know that much about the power of prayer. We really don't know. And it's designed that way by God. That's God's tool. And the best thing about prayer is it works in mysterious ways that we have no idea how it works. The Bible even talks about how man has made God change his mind. I can think 2 different occasions when that happened. Man's prayer has made God change his mind and alter course. So that prayer for our children who can't find that way yet, our prayer for our friends that haven't decided to jump on board yet just may be working in due time. Let's not forget, whose time do we want everything to happen on? What does God say about that?
Yes, sir.
My twins fixing to turn 64. And I can tell you this, that they are a lot smarter than I. Either one of them. But whenever you see something that they have done that's positive, you need to tell them about it.
Yeah, that's true. Yes, sir.
That's why the Bible talks about, and I can't give you the scripture right off the top of my head, we have to ask for the groanings and urgings of the Holy Spirit on our behalf.
Mm-hmm.
He said He can do that in ways that we can't even understand.
That's right. That's right.
The power of prayer. We may have a series on that for too long.
I think we need to keep in mind, yes, we need to pray constantly. But God is not going to force somebody else against their own will to do something. And remember that God promises to hear our prayers of those that are His children. Sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is wait.
Right.
And so keep praying, whether you think you're doing any good.
Right. Absolutely.
Is that clear?
Absolutely. Because we just never know. Yes, sir.
One other thing that I thought about early in my Christian startup was praying constantly. I think God tells us to do that, and remember, this is, I think, because it becomes a filter which everything comes through. If you're praying all the time, I mean, you think of a farmer that has a crop out there and he's praying for his crop to come in. He's not out fishing or water skiing, you know. He's worried about it, and he filters what he does every day through getting that done. We need to keep those filters fresh and good and keep it that way. Every time we turn a corner, we don't have to see everything that else is gone. Just go down that path.
Yeah, the person that their life is guided and rooted in prayer, I can show you a person whose heart is rooted in God, right? And that's what we're trying. We want. There's one chair. We've talked about this before. There's one chair that sits right here on our heart. And is it God that sits in that chair, or is it pride that sits in that chair? There's only two. Somebody had their hand up. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. It's your pathway to God. How many of us have ever worked in the workplace, and we all have a boss, don't we? And how many times have you had to make a decision and you need your boss to get involved and you can't get to him because he's in a meeting or she's in a meeting, and you're just waiting? The big boss, God, you have 100% access to 100% of the time. It's an awesome deal. Wow, we have completely gone off of our script here today. So I will rein us back in about our youth. So here's Solomon. Let's just jump down in what his message is. And the lesson today is chapter 11, verse 9 to chapter 12, verse 7. He says here in chapter 11, verse 9, "Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. But know that for all these God will bring you into judgment. Therefore remove sorrow from your heart and put away evil from your flesh. From childhood and youth are vanity." He wants young people to enjoy life. He wants us to enjoy life. Right? God doesn't want His people to be miserable. He wants His people to have fun and walk around with a smile on their face. And we know that God has that in the design of man. And now we drip into the information that Solomon has given us in Ecclesiastes. What does he tell us about that? Who gives the person the opportunity to enjoy the fruits of his labor? God. Right? And he says that about 4 or 5 different times throughout. God is in control of the joy that you have. And he even goes on to develop the thesis that says the only way to be happy in this life is to have God at the center of it. Because that's the only way that you're going to be able to take all the heartache and pain that this life has and be able to compartmentalize it to the point that you look past that and you look at this life in a bigger picture. And so when he's talking to the youth and he says, have joy in what you do, the joy really comes when God's at the center of your life too. Studying God, following God, obeying God is not just for the older people. It is for the youth of this time period and today. And so he goes into this. He goes, look at Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verses 7 through 10. He says, go eat your bread with joy and drink your wine with a merry heart. For God has already accepted your works. Let your garments always be white, and let your head lack no oil. Live joyfully with the wife whom you love all the days of your vain life, which He has given you under the sun. All your days of vanity, for that is your portion in life, and in the labor which you perform under the sun. I love verse 10. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. Okay? Lord is saying, we want you to be joyful. We've given you the tools to be joyful. Now it's up to you to be a follower of God so you can experience the full joy of life. Because what do we have today? What does this world give our youth today? They give them a false promise of joy, right? I mean, think about this. I was thinking about it earlier today. I was thinking, you know, the youth of today have all kinds of hindrances set in front of them. From the internet, to the cell phones, to the availability of bad things, right? And it's easy for us to say, well, the generation today, it's harder for the generation today to stay godly people than it was the generation of yesteryear. But I think that might not be true. Okay? Because what yesteryear had is different than what we have today. But you know what we have today? We have information. We've got so much information at our fingertips. I think that's just something that maybe some of us old fogies like to say, well, to make our kids feel better. It's a lot harder for you to be a good person today because of the vices that are out there. But it's not true. Yes?
When I grew up, on Sunday, you didn't see people out going fishing. They were at church, in the town.
Yeah.
Very few. And our kids in that school, even though we didn't go to Church of Christ, they went to church too.
Right.
People try to do better and they look to God. It's not that way. It's almost just the family. And outside the world, like your kids, it's everything but God.
Yeah, I think that is true, that the world itself has become less and less churched.
But my age, of course, we weren't strictly church people, but our parents kept us in line. I mean, we had you could do this and you couldn't do this is good, this is bad. And that's why I felt I was okay, because I never did anything bad. The problem is I didn't take that next I didn't take that next step to reaching to God.
Right.
I thought I was all right. And the kids nowadays, there wasn't anything on TV to watch but Gunsmoke and wrestling, so
Right.
we didn't do that. But the kids nowadays have so much distraction, you hardly can keep them off of it. And the strength of the parental guide is not there.
That's true.
You know, Brody, I know it's different for everybody because the area you grew up in may be different than the area I grew up in. But I'm going to tell you, I had friends who were doing dope. We had friends who were pregnant, and that took two people.
Right.
It wasn't a one-sided thing. And there is, Solomon made it very clear, there's nothing new under the sun. No matter what you think, and you may think this generation's got it tougher, and some people may say the older generation had it tougher. I don't think either one had it tougher. I think it's an equal deal. But the problems have always been there, and they will always be here.
Yeah. And it kind of goes to the solution to the problem. The solution to the problem is a Christ-centered home and a Christ-centered person. And how do we help that? Somebody, yes. Let's see.
I don't know any way we could be any more evil than the days of Noah when it said that every thought of mankind was only evil continually.
God destroyed everybody save 8 people before, right? Paul?
Just like Jerry was saying, sins are all the same, but I think this generation has quicker access to it.
That's probably a valid point.
The Hebrew words is to say to follow the impulses of your heart and do what's best in your own eye. And therein lies the solution. We have to train a conscience for the impulse of the eye to be something that's acceptable to God. Mm-hmm. We have to train the mind and the heart for following what's best in your eyes to be acceptable to God. So the answer to the question is back, like you said, to the home, a more proactive, disciplined approach to conscious and mind training.
There's been a lot of families that have tried and failed exactly what you're talking about. And at the end of the day, we have to train ourselves, our friends, and our kids. Because this message now, just so you know, he's talking to the youth, but the message is for us. And we have to decide we're going to say no before the time comes to make a decision. Right? We have to train ourselves that we're going to say no to this before the event happens to us. Right? Sometimes we win, sometimes we lose. We've got to keep our prayer life squared away. In verse 10, I thought it's chapter 11, verse 10. Therefore remove sorrow from your heart and put away evil from your flesh, for childhood and youth are vanity. There's going to be enough sorrow come into our lives because we live in this world. And I think it's good for us to talk to each other and talk to our children and our grandchildren about, don't help yourself heap more sorrow on yourself. Bad decisions result in sorrow. And there's going to be a lot come our way that we can't do anything about, right? Solomon talks about it. You're going to have some dark days in your life on this earth. And Lord willing gives you many, many, many years on this world. You're going to have many, many, many dark days. because we live in a fallen world. But the decisions that we make every day can compound that. And that's what Solomon's talking about. In baseball, they say, don't compound your errors. Right? You've seen it. And if you ever have a chance to go to a Little League baseball game, please go. It's really, that's who man really is. You see dads and moms say things and do things at a Little League baseball game that you'd never imagine them doing. I was one of them. Right? But you also see little Johnny or little Sarah on the softball field. You'll see them compound their errors, so they'll hit a little ball back to the pitcher, and the pitcher will field it, and they'll throw it to first base, and it'll go into right field. Okay? Here they all go running to the ball. Then they get it, and they throw it to a base where nobody's there. And somebody goes and gets it, and they throw it home, and it goes into, and all of a sudden, they come all the way around to score because they won't just stop. And the coaches are screaming, just hold the ball, stop. But they won't. It's impossible. It kind of goes back to what we say at our house. It's impossible for kids to make good decisions sometimes. And so they keep making mistakes to where that run comes all the way around to score. And that's what Solomon's talking about here. In your youth, don't compound your errors because you have enough heartache headed your way anyway. Youthful indiscretions contribute to much sorrow, such as indiscretions compromised by choosing wrong companions. How many times do we talk to our friends and we talk to our kids and we talk to our grandkids about keep the right company. Choose your friends wisely. Friends have a way of peer pressuring you, right? We won't have a chance to read it, but Proverbs chapter 1, verses 10 through 19 talks a lot about that. Proverbs chapter 5, verses 1 through 14 talks a lot about that. Keep your company wisely. Choose good friends. Be very, very careful who you let into your circle of influence. That's for us, and that's also for kids. We've talked about how serving God is not just for the elderly. The Bible has all kinds of examples about how people of young age served God and served God with great esteem, and it paid off for their whole life. Joseph, Samuel, David, Solomon at times, Josiah, Daniel. You remember the story of Daniel, right? That's one of many we could talk about. I mean, he was picked by the king. He saw in him, there's something about this Daniel that I want to train, and he can help me in the future. But as soon as Daniel got taken into the king's court, what did they offer him? The best food, the best wine, the best teachers. And he said, hey, not for me. God doesn't want me to do these things. God will take care of me. And you know the rest of the story. I remember Jesus' example. Talking about, remember, serving God is not just for the elderly. It starts early. What happened to Jesus when he was 12? Remember? He stood behind in the temple. He didn't leave with his family to go home. The great parents that he had didn't realize he was gone for 3 days. Yeah. See, nowadays you have this phone. And if you have this one button you can push, it'll show you where your kid is. Oh yeah, if you didn't know it, ask Kimberly about it. She lives on that. My 21-year-old really loves that feature. But he was gone for 3 days, and they came back to where did they find him? In the temple. Reasoning from the Scriptures. And he had that great answer to when his mom came and says, "Where have you been? Don't you know we've been looking for you?" What did he say? "Don't you know I must be about my Father's business?" What an example for our young kids. If we can get them to study the Bible, which is sometimes hard, if we can get them to study the Bible when they're young, all the illustrations are in there. In the last couple of minutes, he then asked the youth of that day, he says, "I also want you to spend some time thinking about what your life is going to look like in the future." And he details some pretty interesting things here in chapter 12. And it's basically, well, it's basically chapter 12, verses 1 through 7. And there was some people that made some comparisons. The preacher uses various figures to depict the body at an old age and also when it's time to pass on from this life. And he talks about the keepers of the house tremble. There are Bible scholars that make the connection of when the arms weaken. What happens when you get older? Right? The strong men bow down. Your legs become frail. The grinders cease because they are few. Sometimes our teeth fall out, don't they? This is reality. This is serious business. And this is what Solomon is asking these kids at a young age to think about. It won't be long till this happens to you, so take care of your business right now. Those that look through the windows grow dim. The eyes lose their sight. The doors are shut in the streets. The comparison is that sometimes we become hard of hearing. The sound of the grinding is low. Sometimes it becomes difficult to talk. When one rises up at the sound of a bird, sometimes the elderly are easily awakened at night. And all the daughters of music are brought low, the voice no longer able to produce music. They are afraid of height. How many times have you known elderly people that are scared to fall? And terrors are in the way. They no longer feel invincible to this world. When the almond tree blossoms, the wakefulness of old age sets in. And I won't read the rest of these. You can read for yourselves. But it's an appeal to the younger people in a generation. This will happen to you. And a lot of times they don't pay any attention to that, do they? We deal with this at our house with Kimberly's nieces. We deal with it with our kids and their friends, these college-age kids in high school. What do they all want to do? They want to look real good in the middle of the winter. So what do? They jump off into these tanning beds, right? And us as older people, we talk to them all the time. Hey, get out of that. That is bad for you. What do they say? Oh, it may be bad for me, but it won't show up till I'm 40 or 50, and that's forever away. And you talk to us now that played around in those tanning beds 30 years ago. Do we wish we had stayed out of those tanning beds? That's what Solomon's saying. Don't stop talking to them. Because when we stop talking to them, then they don't hear. As long as they hear, they just might remember one thing we said. Right? This is a parenting lesson. This is a grandparenting lesson. The temptations before them are many, and the allurements of the world promise much but deliver little. Life under the sun is vanity, unless there's God in the middle of it. Teach ourselves, teach our neighbors, teach our spouses, teach our kids, teach our grandkids that we're never going to have full happiness unless there's God in the middle of it. And a shameless plug for our Bible hour that meets on Sunday nights up here. Okay? I can't ever remember. 3rd grade through 5th grade? I teach it and I don't even know. See? Kindergarten through 3rd grade. Every Sunday night, right up here. There's different folks that come through that teach that. It's so much fun. Dale and Carolyn, all the lessons are there. They're ready to go. There's all kinds of games to play to talk to them and teach them about God. If you have grandkids, if you have neighborhood kids, if you have anybody, kids that's that age, get them up in there. Get them up in there Sunday night. Those kids have so much fun. They learn so much information. And don't be scared of them. They'll only eat one leg off of you. They won't eat both of them. I'm out of time. We got way off track today, but I enjoyed the class. Remember, this lesson is not just for the youth. It's for us. You got that one chair. Put God in it.